Maxims. Now, I haven't heard of this side of you, these maxims. Now, I'd love to talk a little bit more about those and how you've derived those, where have those come from, like what, yeah, how?
Yeah. Well, there's the famous, saying, "Good artists copy and great artists steal." And there's probably not a single maxim that I'm responsible for. There probably are a few of them, but the vast majority were borrowed and or stolen from minds who are more brilliant than me. But they're basically just sort of one sentence little quips. The purpose of the maxims is really to help me and to hopefully help other people make sound decisions under conditions of certainty. So the price you pay for making sound decisions when it matters, when it really counts, is often being wrong when it doesn't matter that much. So the maxims are intended to help you be right when it really matters, at the cost of often being wrong when it doesn't matter.
Hi, Sean, and welcome to my podcast.
Hey, John. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to talk with you in person. I think we have chatted a little bit on Facebook, and you've, of course, worked with my wife, Cynthia, for a number of months or maybe even a year or more. But I don't think you and I have had a chance to really connect yet.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, I've heard a lot about you via Cynthia, and you seem like an incredibly fascinating character, especially from what I've seen of you on your Facebook posts, and you like Cray as well. So
Right, yes.
there's something in that. There's the Cray connection. So I'd love to hear about a little bit more about you and even why you chose to come onto this podcast. So I'll throw to you. Introduce yourself.
Yeah. Well, I'm Sean King. I'm I guess a serial entrepreneur. I'm an attorney and a CPA, but I primarily have focused on starting businesses over the years, primarily in the investment advisory and insurance spaces. We also have a small yoga studio, and am also just somebody who has become kind of famous for my maxims. I have, I think, around 70 or 80 what I call sort of maxims or rules of thumb, which are kind of a lens that I analyze myself through. It helps keep me honest to some degree, and I also view the world through. And those maxims have, by and large, served me really well. They have contributed to what I think is reasonably clear seeing, and have kind of allowed me to really kind of see where things are going, get ahead of the curve in a number of instances, and make sound decisions, and hopefully contribute to other people making sound decisions also.
Beautiful. Thank you. Maxims. Now, I haven't heard of this side of you, these maxims. Now, I'd love to talk a little bit more about those and how you've derived those, where have those come from, how, like what, yeah, how?
Yeah. Well, there's the famous, saying, "Good artists copy and great artists steal." And I think there's probably not a single maxim that I'm responsible for. There probably are a few of them, but the vast majority were borrowed and or stolen from minds who are more brilliant than me. But they're basically just sort of one sentence little quips. The purpose of the maxims is really to help me and to hopefully help other people make sound decisions under conditions of certainty. So the price you pay for making sound decisions when it matters, when it really counts, is often being wrong when it doesn't matter that much. So the maxims are intended to help you be right when it really matters, at the cost of often being wrong when it doesn't matter. And they're just sort of rules of life. We could talk about a couple of them if that were helpful.
Yeah, I'd love that. What are the maxims that have stood out to you, that have served you, especially like over the COVID period, when I'd say entrepreneurship and instability in economy, people were scrambling for stability. Now, what would you say the maxims that served you the best over that period?
Really, I have several maxims related to conspiracy theories.
Right.
I won't remember them offhand here, but but basically those particular maxims are designed to help keep me from getting sucked into conspiracy type of thinking. And there was a lot of that going on during COVID. There's a lot of tendency in our culture today to fall for false dichotomies, and the maxims, among other things, are designed to help keep me from getting suckered into false dichotomies and to keep me like thinking about, what's the middle ground here? Is there areas, nuance that is being overlooked in the popular narrative that you see in the media and on social media? And the answer to that question is almost always yes. And the world is much more nuanced than our minds want to make it. And recognizing that and being able to, if not accurately detect the right nuance, at least being able to avoid making the wrong decisions when they matter is kind of what the maxims are designed to do.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. In the context of false dichotomies and false dichotomies and nuance, what has been your relationship with the family unit? So whatever you were raised in and whatever you're in now, what's been your experience of the family unit as it's changed as you've progressed and matured?
A lot of this is just things I've figured out in recent years. I wish I figured out some of this much earlier in my life. But one of the things that I've learned is that, the world is really made of stories. And in fact, our own identities, when you really get down to it, is just a story. Our own sense of self is just a story. And I say just, but stories are amazing, or they can be amazing. And culture kind of creates a menu of stories that we grow up in. If we don't have a critical eye, if don't have a bit of a maverick nature, somebody who questions authority and that sort of thing, then we end up just thinking that menu of stories is all we have to choose from. And we end up choosing from that menu. And sort of, part of that menu today is, I'm either single or I'm married. And if I'm, married, I'm married to one person, or I have one partner, that sort of thing. Polyamory and non-traditional relationships are definitely increasingly popular with the younger generations. I think they're going to be challenged to pull that off. Most people are going to be very challenged to pull that off for reasons we could get into. But as for me, Cynthia and I were boyfriend and girlfriend in second grade. I threw mud on her on the playground. We broke up. She broke up with me until we had class together again in eighth grade. And we've been together ever since. We're now in our early 50s. And just about 4 years ago now, met our partner, Lauren, and both of us fell in love and have since been living, writing our own story. There's really not a cultural box that we can choose. We're in a position of kind of writing our own story with our own narrative and our own sort of mythos, sort of family mythos that allows us to really relate to each other and provide a context and a container for everything related to how we relate to each other.
Yeah, perfect. I think it's beautiful. And I really hear the journey of you've been together for so long, and then an iteration and writing your own story has been made available to you. And how has that been? Because what I see is that everyone would have seen you in a story, in their story, in a particular way. And then when you start to write your own story, their story of you changes. So how has that impacted your relationship and how you view other relationship dynamics and in family?
That is a great question. There are definitely some people who, as we begin to write our own story in a number of different ways, not just in terms of our day-to-day family life, we're so invested in the menu of stories that society normally permits us to choose from, that that they just couldn't square that circle. They couldn't get their minds around that. And there are some instances where people have sort of just backed away, or we've sort of grown apart as a result of that. And I think any time that a person is going to begin to exercise independence, independent thinking, etc., you're going to have some people that you alienate, not intentionally. It's not like you're running them off. It's just you vibe your tribe, as the saying goes. And when you are giving out different vibrations than the ones that they're prepared to dance with, they tend to go dance elsewhere. But the good news is that lots of other people, really neat, impactful people, show up in your life. Because you're vibing in a way that is resonating with them. And our life today has really been completely transformed versus 5 years ago, or certainly 10 years ago. And we're just running around with just an amazing group of really intelligent people that are doing incredible stuff out there in the world, from blockchain projects to trying to get tools out there in the public to better help humans relate to each other and connect with each other. And it's just been amazing. So yeah, there's definitely trade-offs. One of the maxims is that everything is a trade-off. All too often, I think people go through life thinking that if they're doing it right, then there won't be a cost. There won't be any pain. There won't be anything they're giving up. And if there is pain, then something's wrong. And that's just not true. I mean, it took me a long time to figure out that literally every decision you make is a trade-off decision. And these decisions are also. And as you make those sort of trade-off decisions, the key, I think, to happiness is making those trade-off decisions with conscious awareness and intentionality, rather than letting your shadow or your cultural indoctrination make those decisions for you in the background without them ever really registering in your conscious radar.
Thank you. I love that. And making those conscious decisions does what I see gives a locus of control that now this is I'm responsible for my life, my decisions, and my emotional landscape. And I think there's a real power and presence that comes from that, instead of feeling like a victim to whatever decisions that you've made. In your serial entrepreneurship, what's guided you to make your decision process to choose whatever it is that you want to invest in?
When it comes to investing, which is a little bit different than being an entrepreneur and founding a business, when it comes to sort of investment type decisions, I actually have a lot of maxims around that, not surprisingly. And one of them is that I am personally looking to make small bets in particular types of domains. And if you do that and you're reasonably good at it, and part of being reasonably good at it is recognizing that you're going to be wrong most of the time, but you only need to be right a little bit of the time. You can end up having outsized results. So what are the domains I'm talking about? Well, I'm primarily talking about what I call protocols. I want to get involved as early as possible in exponential technology. So we're generally talking about information-based technologies here, which everything is becoming an information-based technology today. Get involved as early as possible in information-based technologies that will serve as the new underlying infrastructure for a new system, a new world. So the most obvious example of that is blockchain. Blockchain is absolutely, despite all the stupid stuff you hear in the mainstream media and the government's current war against it, et cetera, it is absolutely going to win, and it is going to form the backbone of not only our financial world, but basically for everything going forward. Blockchains have the unique capability of chronicling or documenting truth. And in an age where deep fakes are going to be cheap and easy for anybody to produce, I mean, really compelling ones, et cetera, being able to prove that a particular document or a particular video or a particular tweet or a particular whatever actually was provably made on a particular date and time, ideally by a particular person, though that part's a little harder, is going to be an incredibly necessary and an incredibly valuable thing to have. And that is, in fact, what blockchains can and will do. So that's an example of the type of projects I like to invest in. I like to get in on them as early as possible, but certainly before, around the time they reach around 1% adoption. Once you reach 1% adoption on a new technology, you're only 7 doublings away from 100%. Most people just don't think exponentially. They don't get that. 1% seems like it's forever from 100%. But no, you're only 7 doublings away. And by definition, network effect, exponentially increasing technologies double at an astounding rate, usually every 1 to 3 years, depending on the tech and that sort of thing. So those are sort of my rules of thumb for trying to discern like where I want to put some chips on the table from an investment perspective.
Thank you. What I hear in your voice is a real passion and drive to be first or to get on that ground level. What is your motivation, or what is it about you, Sean, that makes you find these things and want to put those chips on the table?
So I think this gets back to the Maxims a little bit. The reason I started developing the Maxims, I already had some of them. I just hadn't formalized them and really hadn't thought of them as Maxims. I remember back in I guess it was the early 2000s or so, and you may remember this, maybe not. But there was a famous incident where Iran had supposedly launched a series of rockets. And they published these photographs of these rocket launches. And the West was just super disturbed that Iran now had this, long-range rocket capability, yada, yada, yada. And it was all over the news, all over the media. And this guy, last name Johnson, I forget his first name, who ran a little blog at the time, back when blogging was big, before social media was a thing. And he had a little blog called Little Green Footballs. And he did a little forensics and noticed that this photos that had been released were completely doctored. They were photoshopped and not even that well. But it had deceived governments. It had deceived the media. This was big news story for a long time. And I remember being like literally sick in my stomach. I remember being nauseated when it hit me that we are quickly going to be approaching a world where technology is going to make it exceedingly difficult to know what is true, to know what is real. And I grew up as somebody at the time who just believed that objective truth was a real thing. I'm less committed to that belief now than ever before. But I was really disturbed by that. And I sort of unconsciously went on about a decade-long quest looking for tools, maxims, technologies that would help people discern truth and document truth, or at least be able to make sound decisions when you just can't know what's true under conditions of great uncertainty. So that little incident, totally out of the blue, watching, I believe it was, CNN or Fox News one day, and seeing all this go down, that one little incident sort of changed my life. And it's why I was immediately drawn to Bitcoin when I first learned about it in 2010. I saw it as a truth machine. Why I'm so big on other crypto projects, why I think Chainlink stands a huge chance of revolutionizing the world in a great many ways. So this idea of either being able to discern what is true with a lowercase t, or at least be able to make effective decisions when you don't know what's true, is sort of been my peculiar fascination for the last 20 years. And the suite of tools and ideas that I've stumbled into and developed over that period of time, I'm just very blessed that they have served me really well and continue to serve me really well. They really aid me in making smart decisions.
Thank you. So I hear the fascination came from this event back in 2000. I do not remember that event. I was 20 years old. God knows what I was doing when I was 20. But yeah, just you retelling that, I can feel like the fear, the terror, and the mistrust. Like, well, who do I trust now? Like there's people that are generating news for political ends or whatever ends, malevolent ends, to remove the transparency, the power of transparency and replace it with lies is, I think it's a pernicious slope for any industry or individual that wants to persuade, right? So I value transparency and I value honesty as something that is transformative, not only in a corporate sphere. I remember when I was curious about what my managers and my CEO and the president was earning in their organization, in our organization. And I thought that if everybody just knew what everybody earned, there'd be some level of playing field of like, cool, that's what they earn. And then having discussions around, well, why do they get paid that much? I think in the States, they have a 10-to-1 or a 6-to-1 is the optimum ratio, or maybe, where did I see that? That the highest executive would get paid 6 times higher than what the lowest person would get paid. And there's a correlation between that makes it fair for the lowest paid worker. There's like that ratio gives them a sense of security that if they were to aim for a position like that, or if they were to meet this person, there's not such a distance or disparity in income that it feels uncomfortable or unfair. I don't know why I went there, but that's what I've been seeing. And what I want to ask you in all of that was, do you have a book or a list of all of your maxims where people can access them?
I do. I have I need to be more active here than I am, but I have a blog, so to speak, called A King's Eye View, and it's hosted on Roundtable Media's website. And I do some video podcasts and some writing and stuff. But on there, you can find the maxims. If you just search A King's Eye View Maxims, you'll probably almost certainly find it.
So King's Eye View Maxims?
Yeah, if you Google that, you'll almost certainly find it. I think the link is to a Roundtable Media hosting website.
Beautiful. Thank you. Just wrote that down. So what else I'm hearing in all this, Sean, is the maxims have helped ground you into who you are today. And what I'm also hearing is there's a legacy that you'd like to potentially leave for people or family. What would that legacy be?
I really think this peculiar fascination of mine is, that started 20 years ago, is going to be the number one topic of the next 5 or 10 years. And if I can somehow, through clear thinking, through the tools I've developed, through the technologies I've helped fund and support, if I can somehow help even just a handful of people, but the more the better, be better prepared for what's coming and be less anxious in the face of rates of change that humanity has never experienced before, then that will be extremely rewarding to me. So that's sort of one thing that I want to get out there in the world. The other thing that I want to get out there in the world is just this idea that, you know, identity determines really everything. Everything about your life is a function of you filtering inputs from the environment through a series of stories and then responding as a result of that. And those series of stories, or the most compelling, the most deep-seated, the most unquestioned, uncriticized story that all of that inputs get filtered through is our sense of identity, who we are, what Sean King supposedly likes, what Sean King supposedly doesn't like, what Sean King thinks is moral, what Sean King thinks is immoral, all of those things. And in really, so long as you have a tight grip on a very rigid sense of identity, you're never going to be able to interpret the world properly. You're never going to be able to see that nuance that I referred to earlier. You're not going to detect it. You're not going to realize that you can rewrite your stories and see things differently, and as a result of that, experience the world entirely differently and have the world respond to you entirely differently than what you think is the way it must. And I think that's the biggest message, getting that out and having that land in such a way that that people can take that and really, there's going to be a very limited audience for that. Let's just put it that way. Not everybody's ready to face their own identity and their own identity stories and begin to peel back that onion. But somebody who can face the world with a very thin sense of identity, identity stories, is and will have such a leg up over everybody else because they'll just be able to see the world so much more clearly. So that's an idea that that I constantly look for opportunities to spread, and sometimes it falls on fertile ground, and seeing the fruits of that is just extremely gratifying to me. More often than not, it falls on unprepared or deaf ears, and people think I'm crazy. But that's a message that I think just can't be repeated often enough. It's identity determines destiny. And most of us, our sense of identity is not something we chose. It's something that was conditioned into us at an early age. And unless we're willing to do the painful work, and it is painful, of shedding those identity stories, shedding those attachments, we're going to continue to get from life the same thing we've always gotten from life. Learning a new skill, getting some funding from an outside source. None of that is probably going to change the arc of your life if your identity story doesn't change as a result of that. I kind of learned that the hard way when I became relatively wealthy. I've always been, not always, certainly not always, but for the last 20 years or so anyway, I've always been financially comfortable, but in the last decade or so, quite wealthy thanks to some strategic investments. And when that happened, there were a number of people in my life, some of them just friends, some of them acquaintances or whatever, who in my mind just had bad luck. They had a lot of college debt, and if they could just get that college debt extinguished, it would just send them on a brand new trajectory, or that sort of thing. And so I probably 10 or 15 times I would take a lump sum of money, anywhere from $3,000 to $50,000, and I would pay off some friends' credit card debt, or I would pay off some, college student loans or whatever. And literally every single time within a year, they were right back in the same sort of sticky wicket that they were before I intervened. And that was disturbing to me. That really disrupted my worldview at the time. And I really had to swallow the bitter pill that you really, most of the time, can't help people unless you can successfully help them change their sense of identity. Otherwise, whatever tools you give them, whatever financing you give them, isn't going to change the overall trajectory of their life.
Thank you. Yeah, I hear on the timeline of someone's life that unless there's fundamental identity reflection, then the trajectory is going to be the same. Whatever identity they inherited from childhood or wherever, that's their coordinated. That's the coordinates for where they're going to end up. So then, for you on that journey, Sean, what's been your, if you can speak to the critical moments of identity challenge where you've gone, oh wow, I need to pivot here.
Well, there've been several. I'll point to a few. This is kind of funny in a way, but one of the early ones was just sort of my religious thinking. I grew up sort of a traditional variety of Christian, and that was an important part of my identity. Oddly enough, I read Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code, and that sent me on like a decade-long tour de force into symbolism and esoterica and Kabbalah and Hermeticism and all of that. And ultimately, over the course of that decade, I changed my religious thinking. I would probably still describe myself as a Christian today, but I'm probably not a Christian that any other Christian would recognize as such. I don't fit into any of those little culturally predefined stories that society wants to call Christian today. So that was a huge change in my life. And giving that up, I could not have had the clear seeing that I have today if I wasn't willing to give that up. Because one of the maxims is how you do anything is how you do everything. And in this case, that magical thinking that came along with those traditional Christian boxes bled into areas of my life that I wasn't even really aware of, and kept me from seeing the world very clearly. And only when I was willing to give up that magical thinking, which was a painful sort of change in personal identity, that I began to really see the world more clearly. So that was, a huge change. Another huge change in identity was, bringing Lauren into our life. What a light and what a joy she has been. But after being with Cynthia, basically since second grade, with a few year break between second grade and eighth grade, and then having a new partner that we're incorporating into that was a radical change in sort of each of our senses of identity, and it required a lot of work on all three of our parts. And the last 4 years has been each of us doing a lot of shadow work, a lot of talking, a lot of communicating. And I'll say that 2023 has just been incredible. Probably the bulk of that work, I'll never say all of it, but the bulk of that work I think is behind us now. And 2023 has just been so far the most amazing, beautiful, incredible year of my life. And I look forward to what comes next. So there have been probably a few other sort of major identity shifts, and those identity shifts don't happen overnight. The Lawrence situation was a 4-year sort of shift in process. The religion thing I referred to unfolded over the course of a decade. So these aren't things that usually just happen with the snap of the finger. But if you lean into the triggers, and that's another maxim, the triggers are the guide. If you really lean into the trigger and you own the fact that my trigger is always on me, if I'm experiencing jealousy, that's a result of some story that I have, maybe a story I want to keep, in which case I just have to get used to being jealous and feeling that feeling, and that's okay. Or it may be a story that I don't want to keep that's not serving me well, and maybe I want to do the hard work of kind of rewriting that story. But the idea that the triggers are our guides and we own our own triggers, and for me to expect you to change your behavior because I'm having an emotional reaction to it, which is what 99.9% of the world expects out of life, to me is just arrogant, offensive, privileged. It's obscene for me to expect you to change your behavior because I'm having some emotional reaction to it. And really figuring that out, really doing the hard work that comes from committing to that idea has transformed my sense of identity and therefore transformed my life. It's been amazing.
Thank you. What I heard towards the tail end of that was the entitlement that some people have in regards to, now you need to change in order to make me feel safe. And what popped out of my head there was paying off student debt. And this concept of when you helped people with their financial issues, and then their trajectory just ended up being back in debt anyway. And what I see is without those identity shifts that you mentioned, that people will always go back to whatever their original trajectory was. But this concept of entitlement and like paying off debt, paying off that the government, that some other external entity owes you safety and owes you financial security or a house over your head or anything like that. So what will be your take on that, on the consensus that the government owes people something?
I would rather not just limit it to the government, though that's the way it typically plays out in the media. I'll just say that I find, and I have always felt this way, so this is not something that has been a significant change for me, but I just find this idea that other people are responsible for how I feel, for my financial condition, for any of that. I just find it repulsive at a level that I probably can't even fully describe, and I find it extremely disempowering, which I think honestly is why it's there, right? I think it's so prevalent because most humans want to be disempowered.
Yeah.
They want to not feel like, if they're not disempowered, then their inner critic steps in and says, well, all this shit is your fault. And that inner critic's not necessarily right. I mean, it's right in a way, but wrong in another way. And so the easy out for the ego is, well, this isn't my fault. This is somebody else's fault. Somebody else owes me something, and I'm resentful and bitter and angry because I'm not getting it. And unfortunately, this idea of sort of entitlement has really taken root in woke culture. It's the resentment and the anger is the whole basis for that culture. And what's interesting is it just validates the old thing that you become what you resist, right? I mean, the whole foundation of the woke movement originally was to resist privilege. But there's nothing more privileged than woke ideology. It is the epitome of entitlement and privilege. But there's just a massive blind spot that prevents most of them from seeing that. They can see it in others. It's a classic case of projection, but they hear. And it's tragic. It's sad. It's one of the things that I could probably literally go and cry about for about a half hour if I thought about it too much, because it's a weird. It brings up a weird emotions in me, a combination of both repulsiveness and pity. It's just sad.
Thank you, and thank you for going there too, Sean. I appreciate you uncovering that. And in the framework of characterology, that entitlement injury comes from orality, a very early stage in childhood where the connection with the mother was severed, and then it kind of plays out throughout the rest of their life where they feel like they're owed something. They're owed something, and every tantrum that is there, that they are allowed, give themselves permission to express that they demand their attention. They demand whatever's there, whether it's resources, whether it's attention. And I know in my work, when I've taken someone back into that injury, the oral injury, there's terror and disgust that appears, where this person is so angry at their mother for not providing for them, either emotionally or physically or whatever it is, that they emerge a different person. Because without being able to reparent, going back to that place and feeling all the feelings that they couldn't feel because the mother is their earth. It's their bastion for existence, and they don't want to get mum too angry or too upset because she could leave. But even Wilhelm Reich spoke to this as well, where he saw this injury. He didn't know how bad it was going to get later in life, but it's the fundamental issue that's in the States right now. This whole woke culture's come from an instinct injury in childhood. That it doesn't matter how much academia someone can try and swashbuckle or navigate with, their body wants this entitlement. They want this safety provided by you or somebody else. So it's fascinating that this is something that's coming up right now. I think it's going to hit a critical mass. It can't. It's illogical. It doesn't make any sense that you outsource your self-worth, self-being, self-efficacy to somebody else.
Yeah, my sense is that we hit peak woke a year or two ago.
Right.
I think the pendulum is starting to swing the other direction, and it's going to go out with one massive temper tantrum for sure. But I don't think we're going to be. I don't think 5 years from now, and certainly 10 years from now, that this is going to be a cultural influence of significance. I think it's thankfully seen its day. I hope I'm right on that, because
yeah, me too. I hope you're right too. I'll put some chips on the table. Entrepreneurship. What is entrepreneurship to you? Because in my Facebook profile, I've got entrepreneur, but I just put it on there because that's what I felt like. That's what I was. And this concept of entrepreneurship, I think, can become, especially for newer generations, this almost like a signaling of like, no, I'm an independent, I'm free, I'm this. But for you and for your generation, what has entrepreneurship meant to you?
I'm really fortunate in that my father was always an entrepreneur of sorts, and so I always sort of had that modeled for me. And because he sort of ran his own business, I mean, he worked his ass off. He worked 70, 80 hours a week for 30 years, 40 years or more. But being an entrepreneur, he could set his own schedule. He could show up at my softball games. He could work, with a cell phone on the side of the soccer field, or that sort of thing. And I up close and personal view of both the great advantages of entrepreneurship and the downside of it, which is a lot of risk and a lot of angst, anxiety, and a lot of work. And I guess I just, partly with his coaching, partly with the help of some other mentors, I graduated, I believe it was 5th in my class in law school. And I had, amazing offers to go work for law firms. And most of my friends in law school, went to work for the man in law firms. And I graduate law school and go start my own insurance and investment business, in partnership to some degree with my father. So, I did have some sponsorship there, but no, everybody thought I was crazy. Everybody thought I was just, insane. Why would you go to law school and then go start your own business? But I just had this sense that, as Jordan Peterson often preaches, I didn't have the benefit of his insight at the time, but the 20s is the time to really just suck it up and bear down and take some risks while you're young, while you have a chance to recover if something goes wrong, and figure out how to make it work, jump in the water, sink or swim. And I had a sense of that, and I did it, and my 20s were absolutely brutal. Not a decade that I want to go back and relive. I was, by the end of my 20s, $175,000 in credit card debt, which doesn't sound like much today, but back then it seemed like more money than God had. And, just paying the interest on that credit card debt was, more than I was making in a year. And, I was that close to filing bankruptcy when, finally, as people always said, the key to being an entrepreneur in the particular industry I was in is gutting it out for the first 5 years. If you can get through the first 5 years, which are brutal, then you're going to be fine. And sure enough, late in that 5th year, some big deals happened, some big cases happened that allowed me to basically get out of debt and started me on a trajectory that eventually led to, financial comfort and financial security. But I think that was it. I think I just had a sense that the 20s is the time to take this risk and to go for it. And I'm always a bit of a maverick. I'm an Enneagram type 8. The idea of working in a corporate environment and someone else telling me what to do, and I mean, that just wasn't consistent with my nature. So at least in entrepreneurship, if I failed, I failed because of me. And if I didn't fail, I didn't fail because of me. And that had more appeal to me than somebody else dictating the course of my career.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really hear a sense of self-ownership and inner sovereignty. But I'm it. Like I'm it. And in that journey through your 20s, the grit and the resilience that came from that journey helps you celebrate where you're at today. But without those challenges in your 20s, there's something around suffering and pain and grit that I hear that's shaped you.
And it does have an impact today. One of the big challenges I had was I was in my early 20s out of law. I was in my mid 20s, I guess, out of law school, and started in this financial services career. And so in the financial services career, you don't make money unless you're serving people who make money. And nobody in their early, late 20s had money, which means I'm 25 years old and I'm calling on 45 years old, trying to convince them to let me manage their money, let me handle their investments, let me handle their insurance, that sort of thing. And, that was brutal. That was just, what 45-year-old is going to let this young 25-year-old manage the fortune, right? And so it was just really, really hard to even get face-to-face appointments with people. It was really hard once you got the appointment to make the sale. And because of that pain, because of that suffering today, one of the things that I sort of carry with me is, and I've had to work through, is it feels ungrateful for me now when people want my time, because I used to have to call people to get their time. Now I've got people calling me, reaching out to me constantly, wanting my time. And it feels ungrateful to me, given the experience that I had, to blow them off, to say no. They want me to review their pitch deck because they're about to launch a project. They know I have a good entrepreneurial background and a good track record of investing, and they want me to review their pitch deck and give them feedback on it or whatever. And I do some of that. I do a lot of that, but I could spend 15 hours a day doing that if I wasn't saying no. And yet it kind of feels ungrateful for me to say no. And so I've sort of had to work emotionally through that and make peace with the fact that it's really not being ungrateful, and everything is a trade-off. And for me to be as good with Cynthia and as Lauren as I want to be, for me to be as good in the areas of my business that I want to focus on, for me to have the time to analyze the world and apply the maxims and see clearly and make strategic investment decisions. For me to do those things, I've got to be able to say no to a lot of people and to say no to a lot of really good opportunities. And that's probably the second biggest bitter pill I had to swallow once I became really successful. The first was this idea that throwing money at people and solving their financial problem isn't going to change the trajectory of their life.
So on your landscape of you, when you survey your kingdom, Sean, of everything that you've done, the future, where do you see potential little revolts or uprisings or fields that need to be sown for you? Where do you see your future that you need to focus some attention on?
Like personally within the kingdom, or like more macro globally?
Do personal first. There was always a macro, micro. Start with the personal first. Like where do you see for you? Because you seem very accomplished to me, and this is the cream of your life is right now. And what is it that you see on the horizon that you want to, that needs attention?
So one of the things that I really am working on, and it was a goal of mine for 2023, was to really get better with energy and energetics. I'm an Enneagram type 8, so I'm naturally sort of an intuitive person and a very loyal and loving person. But I find myself, especially with the feminines in my life, too often engaging at a verbal level and engaging with the words rather than really being emotionally attuned to the sentiment that's behind the word, and to the fact that often the words are a smokescreen, they're a distraction flare. And if I go chasing that distraction flare, I'm not doing them any favors, and I'm denying myself a chance to really connect with the people who are important to me. And so one of the skills that I have really needed to develop, and I've spent so far a lot of 2023 developing, what I'm thrilled to say some success, is realizing that when a person, particularly a feminine, I won't say female because not all females are feminine and not all males are masculine, but when a person, particularly a feminine, is engaging with you verbally, the words are the least important part of that exchange. And the feelings that are behind those words, which are often obscured by the words, not elucidated by the words, but actually obscured, is the real thing that I need to try to ground on and connect to and relate to. And so developing that skill set has been a life-changing thing for me. It's been really cool actually to kind of learn that feminine way of relating and that more feminine dance. And so that's an area where I sort of saw a weakness and then a chink in the armor in the kingdom, and have been working to sort of plug that hole.
Yeah, beautiful. In the layers of the Enneagram, what level would you say your type 8 is at?
At this stage of my life, I would say I'm a very healthy type A. So I would say level 1 or 2.
Yeah, cool. I love when you would speak. Sorry, what were you saying?
There were certainly times in my life when that wasn't true, but today I think that's mostly true.
Beautiful. Yeah, for my reflections on you is that I feel really intimidated by like your presence, which is different for me. I don't talk to many men, especially men who are so grounded in themselves, financially, emotionally, sexually, that it's allowed me to experience this. Oh, I feel really intimidated right now. This is new for me, and then I find you really challenging to get a read on. Like there's a field around you that I don't want. Like there's this very challenging for me to penetrate you as another man.
Really?
So I guess for me, I need to like.
That's
so for me,
because I'm really trying to be like more, much more open and emotive. So
it's
I feel badly. Great. I feel like I failed you.
No, this is good. So as soon as I said that I felt intimidated, you opened up. So now I can read you now. Like there's it needed one of us in this interaction to be like, okay, cool. I'm just gonna put my guard down. I'm like, cool, John. I think I have my guard. Even though energetically, I have my arms folded. I very rarely do I ever have my arms folded when I'm speaking to someone. So cool. Put my arms down. Allow myself to experience like all of this. Like I'm in front of someone who is so financially, like relationally successful and grounded in himself. Like started entrepreneurship in his 20s. Like I started in my 40s. So I'm like a child in the entrepreneurship world. And then being able to be open and honest and frank, and then also navigate a questioning where I want to honor your wisdom and time, and also be able to ask you questions that are penetrating enough so you have a reflection, you have an experience of having this conversation. It's been very different for me. I'm enjoying this experience because it's new.
Well, I have too. I maybe we should do this again, and I'll try to have shields down earlier in the conversation.
It takes two. It takes two to tango here. Like I feel like I could have said that earlier. I didn't know what I was feeling because it was new. So how do I articulate what I'm feeling? So like I get a sensation. Like the sensation I'm feeling is a pressure around my thymus, and my breath isn't as deep as it normally is, and it's usually edging on a flight or fight type thing. And like, hey, just be with it. Be with the breath. So yeah, I'd love to do this again, and I want to do some more research on your king's eye view. And I love this conversation, Sean. This is great because I really feel like there's something that's here. I don't know what it is, but I've really enjoyed this conversation. Do you have any questions for me?
Not so much a question, probably, but just a thank you. I mean, you have been a hugely positive influence on Cynthia, my wife's life, and she's worked with you for how long? A year and a half?
I think it's about a year, but we keep in contact, so it's open.
And I mean, she's a huge fan, and you had a major impact. And I think the stuff that you're doing is just it's exactly when I said before that, one of the things I want to do is try to get tools out into the world to help humans relate to each other. So sort of my two key themes are clear seeing or discernment in times of uncertainty. And the second then is relating. And I think you are really doing God's work in terms of helping your clients do the shadow work, develop the tools to allow themselves to feel emotions that they have avoided feeling for so long. And in doing so, really helping them open up and be able to relate and connect to people who are important in their life much more effectively. So well done. Keep it up. And if there's anything that I can do to support that, I would be happy to do it. And I would love to have more conversations like this. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Beautiful. Thank you, Sean. Thank you so much for being present today, just sharing your experience and who you are. I really feel who you are, Sean, in this environment where you've come from. And there's so many more nuanced stories in who you've become that I'd love to hear. And maybe that's in your blog and maybe it isn't. But who you are is, I do see you energetically as a pillar in where we go next as a civilization, like someone who's just like, nah, I believe in this. I believe in this with such ferocity, and I might not always display that ferocity in who I am. I'm contained, but this is important, especially with the blockchain. Like, this is important, like truth and transparency. This is important for the civilization as we move forward, because without trust, world without trust, that's a dystopia I don't want to look at.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I think I had that, that wave of nausea with that little green footballs, doctored Iran photo back in the 2000s, whenever it was. I mean, it was just to contemplate a world where, and we saw it during the pandemic. We just saw all these different narratives and all these different stories, and nobody can tell what's true. And everybody's falling for false dichotomies and conspiracies and taking sides. And if we can't get our shit together, the pandemic is going to be like, playtime. It's going to get much, much worse. And I think the tools are coming online with blockchain and some other projects. I think folks like you doing the work to teach human adulthood, how to be a fucking human adult instead of a human child. More and more and more people are out there doing that with good success. And I just really hope that can scale.
Beautiful. Thank you, Sean. Appreciate that piece of wisdom at the end.